Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful lunch. I know I did. I had some lunch and dessert as well, so I'm very happy. Filled up my water bottle. I'm hydrated, ready to go. Welcome back to day one, frame two. We are moving into connecting the tech stack frame. I hope you had a good time visiting the sponsors' booths, doing a treasure hunt, and so forth. Joining us first up is Ben Dechrai. Ben is a senior developer advocate at Auth0. He's got
Hello,
a
everyone.
background in software engineering, solutions architecture, and business analysis, all things required to be a good DevRel. And Ben, you're going to talk to us about extending your authentication flows using Auth0 Actions. So I'm
I
super
am.
excited to hear this.
I also had the great privilege of watching you eat lunch and dessert, and I'm now getting a little bit hungry, so I'm a bit jealous. So thanks. Thanks for reminding me.
Lovely. Go for it, mate.
All right. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks for tuning into this chat. I basically want to talk to you about a feature of Auth0 that came out about a year ago in general availability. And I created a 3-hour workshop about this, but I've only got 25 minutes. So I figure we probably can't do the whole thing. But what I'd like to do is start by going through basically the oversight of or the overview of what the workshop entails, so that you've got an idea of what we're trying to do. And then we're going to dive in and focus just on that one part about Auth0 Actions, so that you can see how easy it is to use Auth0 and extend it with your own code. You can actually upload your own JavaScript into your Auth0 dashboard, and then when one of your users logs in, we'll run that for you, which allows you to really customize exactly what happens during that authentication flow. So let's just jump through a quick number of slides first, just for that overview. Quick intro about me. I'm been doing software development. I think I probably need to update this. I can't remember when I updated this slide, but with a pandemic, this could be like 23 or 24 years. I've lost count. I don't even know what year it is anymore. But I've been really passionate about security and privacy for a very long time. I've been very involved in open source communities and developer conferences, and this kind of all culminated about 3.5 years ago, when I joined Auth0 as a developer advocate. So I really love talking to the community, finding out what challenges you're facing, and just having a chat about what's going on with you. So reach out to me on Twitter. My DMs are always open. Come jump into the Auth0 booth afterwards for a chat. If you like, I'll be hanging out there after my talk and during the breaks. So yes, that's me. So what are we building today? Well, we're not going to be building this, but the workshop would be designed to build basically a web store. It's going to have a dynamic product catalog so that you can modify what's for sale easily. We're going to have user authentication, so we know who's making an order, and a checkout and payment mechanism, which is kind of like the main point of a web store, right? There's no point in having a web store if you can't buy things. So the technologies that I thought I would use for this are naturally Auth0 for the authentication, Stripe for the payment side of things, Netlify as the platform that we're going to build it on, and React as the tech stack that's going to sit on top of that platform. I'll go through a couple of the reasons why I chose some of these, but there's something missing from this, which if you were developing any kind of web store, you might think you would need as well. I won't ask for hands up or anything, because that's just going to make a virtual chat really awkward. So I'll just go straight in to say what's missing. Well, a database. We're going to need to store products somewhere. We're going to need to store orders somewhere. We need to know which users are buying which products, and invoices and all of those kind of things. So what can we do to eliminate the database from this scenario altogether? This is a problem that I was trying to solve. I was trying to think, is there a way that we can do this? Obviously, there are going to be data stores involved, but can we do this without a traditional idea of setting up a database and configuring the schema and connecting to it and reading and writing data and all of those kind of things? Can we remove that, abstract it in some way? So the design theory, I use Netlify. The main reason for this, I'm not really pro or against any of the platforms or services, but one of the things I really like about Netlify, and one of the reasons why I use it a lot for like my proofs of concepts and hacking around, is I really like their CLI tooling and their development server. And particularly, I like the fact that the cloud functions in Netlify can actually be run through the local CLI tool. So if you do a Netlify dev, you can actually run the cloud functions locally. Which not all of the platforms and services providers allow you to do readily or easily. So I like the fact that I can have functions running in my development environment, which we'll see in a second. And the theory about how this is all going to work without that database is that React is going to require a list of functions, and it's going to get that from this cloud service that we're going to, this cloud function that we're going to write. And it's actually going to pull those directly from Stripe, because Stripe allows you to configure products and pricing and those kind of things inside it, including descriptions and images. And we'll have a look at the dashboard in a second. If somebody wants to buy something, they're going to call an endpoint to say, hey, I want to buy this product. But at this point, we don't have a concept of a customer yet. So there's a bit more work we need to do before our cloud function is going to be able to talk to Stripe and say, hey, let's buy this product for this person. So before that happens, we need some kind of login mechanism. And we're going to use Auth0 for that. And this is where the Auth0 actions come in now. So we're going to get Auth0 to talk directly to Stripe by writing some code that we're going to stick into Auth0. And we're going to say, hey, Auth0, when somebody logs in, go to Stripe and get Stripe to create a representation of a customer. Stripe's then going to return very specific information, customer ID being one of them. And we're going to take that customer ID and we're going to store that against the user in Auth0. Now, there's another feature within Auth0, app metadata. In fact, there are two. There's user metadata and app metadata, where you can store arbitrary JSON-based information against any user. And essentially, user metadata is any information that the user can change, and app metadata is any information that the app can change. So we don't want the user to be able to change information about themselves. This might be useful for things like, do they want dark mode? Like the kind of thing that if they change it themselves through an API call, which it's not going to be relatively easy, but they could potentially do, it's not going to break the system. But if they change their Stripe customer ID, it's potentially going to break the system. So we're going to store this in the app metadata, which means only our application can make changes to that. So back to the design theory. Once that Stripe customer ID is in against the user, we're then going to modify the access token that gets returned. And we'll have a look at the identity token and the access token and what they contain as well. That access token we're going to augment, and we're going to add, again, through another Auth0 action, the Stripe customer ID as a custom claim inside that access token, which now means our React app has access to the Stripe customer ID just by the user logging in. So the React app is now able to take that access token and pass it to our Netlify function, and the Netlify function can then call a byproduct endpoint at Stripe and include that Stripe customer ID. So Stripe now knows who's making the purchase. And we don't have a database anywhere in there, other than, of course, Stripe and Auth0 are databases, but they're not, if that makes sense. So we've eliminated the need for an entire part of the overall design, the database, and we should still have a perfectly functional application that I would argue, to a certain extent, is production ready. So let's go. Let's just jump into it. I'm going to bring over, if I can find the right application here. So this is localhost port 8888. Let me just jump over to Visual Studio, make sure we're actually running here. We are. So if I hit refresh, okay. So this is the web store that we've written. And if you ever see me do this as a workshop later, we actually build this step by step. But I've pre-done a whole load of this so that we can basically jump straight in. And if we jump over into the Stripe dashboard, we can see here they've got a list of products, and we've got the images and the names and the prices, and that's basically what's showing up here. So we're pulling this straight out of Stripe via a Netlify function, and we're able to display those in our application. Now, the first thing that you can see here is that we're going to need to log into purchase. So if I click on log into purchase, it's warming up. There we go. I'm now being asked to log into my account, and I'm just going to jump over to Auth0 here. So we can see already that we have a user over here with my email address, ben@dechrai.com. So I'm going to log in with this user. I always find it hard to talk and type at the same time, so excuse me while I go silent while I'm typing. We can see now that this has changed to a buy now button because I'm logged in. We can also go over and have a look at the profile information, and this is going to pull out the identity token and the access token that have come back from Auth0. Let's make this a bit bigger so we can have a quick look at it. We can see here we get, if you're familiar with identity tokens, standard bit of information here. We've got the SUB or the subject, which is basically a unique identifier of my user within the Auth0 system. This value here, starting with 6, ending with 3, we'll see again later. And then the access token, we're basically saying that the localhost port 8000, which is where our Netlify functions are also running, is allowed to consume any access tokens that come in. So we can now pass this access token to our Netlify functions. And the Netlify function, when it verifies or validates the JSON Web Token, the access token that's come in, is going to say, yes, this is a valid token, and it's intended for me, so therefore I can consume it. but there's nothing in here yet about the Stripe user, which obviously we need to get in. So if I go back to the home page and we try and buy one of these products, we're going to get an error saying Stripe customer ID has not been found. So I'll just quickly jump into the code so we can see roughly what's going on at this point here. When we click in buy, when we click the buy button, no, it's in the home page. When we click the buy button, we get the access token out here. And basically, if we try and make an order and we pass through the access token, the API is going to return an error to us saying we don't have a Stripe customer ID. In the case that we don't, we alert that. So that's what's happening here. If we do have an access to, or a Stripe customer ID in there, then we're going to be able to proceed and actually make that order. But we don't need to worry too much about the code. I just want to show you roughly what was going on behind the scenes. So we need to solve this problem of Stripe customer ID not found. Let's jump into the user section. We're going to come down to actions, and we've got flows and library. We'll jump into library first. This is where we can create a whole lot of our own custom actions. So you can install predefined actions, which are available through our, where's my mouse gone? Through our marketplace down here. But I'm going to build a custom action, and I'm going to create Stripe customer. So when a user logs in, I want to automatically create a Stripe customer. You could argue that I should do it on post-user registration. If a user registers, then I'm going to create a Stripe customer. But remember, I've already got an account. I just logged in as Ben at Dechrai.com, and I want to make sure that any account that's in the system, whether I log in or create it from scratch, I want to make sure it has a Stripe customer ID. So I'm actually going to go with the post login. And when we create that, we then get a mini IDE in the Auth0 dashboard. And over here, we can import or store some secrets. This is like environment variables, which we're going to need to do because we're talking to Stripe. So I'm going to jump into the developer tab over to API keys, and we're going to copy the secret key. Oh. Always fun when a demo gets paused. There we go. So I'm just going to copy this, and we can now add a secret key over here. I'm going to paste this value in. Now I'm just going to refer to my notes over here because I want to make sure that I'm copying the right value. We want, where's it gone? This one here. So we're going to call this Stripe secret key. We now have a secret over here, Stripe secret key, which we can use in our code on the right-hand side. And in fact, the code that we're going to use is, let's copy instead of pasting. Let's copy that again. Come back to me. There we go. Why is the mouse not behaving? There we go, paste it in. So we're now pulling the Stripe secret key out of event secrets. And you'll see here at the top, we've got event and API. Just quickly, event is basically any data that we can use to make decisions, and API is something we can use to effect change. So we're saying we want to get the secret Stripe secret key, and we want to require Stripe. Now, Stripe is not a default package. We're going to have to install that. And over on the left here, we can actually add dependencies. So I'm going to say this bit of code here is dependent on the Stripe module. So now we've got access to the Stripe module. Let's get rid of this so we can see a bit more. Got access to the Stripe module. We've got the secret key in there. And now essentially we're going through, and remember that app metadata that we were looking at against the user? We're basically saying if the app metadata already has a Stripe customer ID, then do nothing. It's already done. But if they don't have a Stripe customer ID, we're going to use the Stripe object that we've just pulled in here. We're going to create a new customer. We're going to provide Stripe with the customer's email address that they use to log in. And we're also going to add in the user ID. So that was this subject component, which we'll have a look at again in a second. So basically saying to Stripe, create this customer for us. And then the result of that is this customer object here, this result will contain an ID. So as well as pushing the Auth0 user ID into Stripe, we're taking the Stripe customer ID and we're storing that in Auth0. So all I need to do now is hit deploy. Now, deploy is not actually going to make this code active straight away. We need to just define where it gets executed in the flow. Now, by default, it's going to go into the login because it's a login custom action. by default, there's only one place that it can go, but you'll see in a second in the second place that we can actually define the order that things get run in here. So I'm going to apply that. So now when the user logs in, we're going to make sure they have a Stripe customer ID. If we look over here, we'll just confirm there are no customers in Stripe at the moment yet. So if I log out, make this a bit smaller again so we can see what's going on, and I log in again, we shouldn't notice any difference as a user, but if we come over here and refresh the customer list in Stripe, we should now have an additional user. And there we have this automatically generated by Auth0 action. That's actually some of the code you might have noticed was the description that we added in when we created a customer. That was this bit here, automatically generated by an Auth0 action. If we go in, we can see, or we could also see on the previous page, and on this page here, that we've got the email address that was passed through. But down here, we have that Auth0 user ID that began with 6 and ended with a 3. So now we have a one-way relationship from Stripe customers to Auth0 users. If we come back over and have a look at the Auth0 user management, we can see if we look at this customer ID that's just been created, starts with an L, ends with a Q. And over here under users, if we scroll down, we will see that we now have a Stripe customer ID in here, starts with an L, ends in a Q. So we've done the first step. We've now got the user information or the customer ID in Auth0. So the next part now is, I mean, we've got that information in here. If we look at the access token, nothing's changed. So we need to add that into the access token so that we can provide that to the Lambda function. So I'm going to jump back into actions. You could technically add this into the same custom action here. I'm going to create a second one saying add Stripe customer ID to access token. I'm going to create a second one just so you can see how those flows work. And this one is a little simpler. I'm still going to copy and paste it though, because typing while doing a demo usually invariably means you're going to put an error in, and I don't want any errors. So this one's really simple. Basically, we're going to that app metadata information again, and we're saying grab the Stripe customer ID out. If it exists, we're going to create this custom claim. So I'm just going to change this to be localhost 8888, because that's by default when you add a custom claim, the convention is to use the domain of the system you're calling. So I want to add Stripe customer ID in, and we're going to add this Stripe customer ID from the user app metadata. So if I deploy this, we can then jump over into flows once it's saved, and we'll add that in as a second action to be run during the login process. And here you'll be able to see that we can choose to do it before or after. Now, obviously, we want to do it after, because we want to make sure the Stripe customer ID is created first, and then we add the Stripe customer ID to the token. If we hit apply, so now in theory, if all things are well, and I can find my mouse again, if we come over here and we log out, and we log back in again, jump over to the profile page, we should now see here, here's the customer ID being passed through. Let's make that bigger again. So we've got the localhost port 8888, Stripe customer ID, and the Stripe customer ID is being passed in. So Auth0 is now providing this information to our React application, which means if I go to the homepage now and click buy, rather than getting a Stripe customer ID that doesn't exist, Stripe now knows who's making the order and is going to redirect us to the payment page to say, hey, we know this user already. We've got the email address for them, and you can now make an order. So don't copy my username, my credit card information. It's highly sensitive. If I save my information, I'm not going to do that. And hit pay. And then we'll get redirected back to the success page, and the order's been made. We can now confirm over here, when we look at payments in Stripe, that we just got this $129 payment made just a minute ago. Don't ask me what this one's about, the incomplete one. I'm not a Stripe professional. But yes, we've now basically created, by adding our own code into Auth0, the ability to pass information through in a really interesting and different kind of a way, thinking outside of the box of how this data flows and where we store it. We've eliminated the need for a database, and we have added some extensive functionality into our authentication flow, which is making our application our development job as developers much easier, because we no longer need to worry about all of the. As a React application developer in this particular instance, I don't need to worry about where the data is coming from. That can all be controlled from one place, which simplifies things. So I hope that's been useful and informative. As I say, it's a really quick dive into actions and the power behind there. There's so many different ways that you can use actions. I've seen people using it for like consent pages. When you create an account, you can actually redirect them off to a different site and say, here's a code of conduct, for example, that we want you to agree with, and you have to agree to it before the account creation can be completed. So there are various ways that you can use actions to make your life easier and to consolidate all of this authentication flow logic into one place, rather than embedding it into disparate places like different APIs and your applications. Because of course this will then run across whichever application you're trying to secure within your ecosystem. Hope that makes sense. Anyway, I think we have some time for questions if there are any.
It does. Yeah, look, this is super exciting. I think I'm old enough to remember when you had to actually buy servers and do all sorts of crazy things. And
I know,
the
right?
fact that we've got all these SaaS offerings is incredible.
Well, the crazy thing to me is that not just did we have to build our own things, but to do something like this, like the longer workshop is 3 hours. And as I mentioned to you just before we went live, I've managed to do this in 45 minutes, which is hectic, but possible. But just imagine if you'd want to create any kind of web store 10 years ago, it would have been weeks of work.
Months.
If you wanted to do it 15 years ago, it would have been years of work. So yeah, it's amazing where we've come to. And it's amazing that as a developer, I don't need to worry about, like this application now, I can do a Netlify deploy and it's running. Like, that just blows my mind still.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's echoed by Phil in the chat, just talking about how you get so much from each of the platforms. So that's great. Well, look, given you're from Auth0, I do have a question for you related to that platform, which is what is the best way to manage these configurations, right? Because you're doing this in the GUI, and that's great, but when you need to move that to a new environment or replicate this for a new app or whatever it might be, can you check it into a Git repo and deploy it from there, as an example?
So there are 3 main ways you can do it. And in fact, what I always tell people is the management API. So when I created my tenant, a management API was automatically created, which means I can actually talk to my tenant endpoints that are hosted on my tenant URL, and that allows me to make configuration changes. And in fact, the management API can do more than the dashboard can. We've always gone at it from a philosophy of, when we want to add functionality, API first, dashboard second. But also we have the deploy CLI tools. So you can actually put a lot of this into essentially like configuration files and use the CLI tools to deploy that into a tenant, which means you can codify all of the configuration, put it into your repositories and do it that way too.
Yeah, fabulous. No, that's I think that sounds amazing. Cool. And look, as I was telling Ben, where at work, we are big Auth0 fans. We've been using them for a while. It's just a fabulous product, and echoing what Phil said as well, you just get so much out of the platform, and especially identity. You do not want to bake that in yourself. Totally. Thank you very much for all the hard work you do.
Yeah, no worries. I actually used to come from the philosophy of, I can secure my customers better than anybody else because I'm invested in my customers more than anybody else can be. And a friend of mine, this is like 8 years ago, reframed it, or thereabouts. And he said, if you had a data breach and you lost information about your customers, what would that do to your business? I said, well, it would be a lot of hard work trying to rebuild like confidence and all those kind of things. And they said, if the same thing happened to an identity provider, what would happen to them? Like the impact to them would be way bigger than the impact to me.
Dead.
So they're actually more interested in keeping my users secure than I am. I'm more interested in making sure my users get the service that I want to provide them. I thought, wow, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And it was quite an eye-opening moment for me.
Yeah. Oh, fabulous. Ben, thank you so much. This is really lovely, and thank you for kicking us off after lunch.
Thanks, Akil.